The coffee at Rito Perk smelled the way good mornings were supposed to. Dark and honest, none of that flavored syrup nonsense, and that alone was reasons enough for Joel Hartley to drive 20 minutes out of his way on a Tuesday. His daughter Maisie was in the back seat still wearing her backpack, because at 7 years old she treated it like part of her body and fought him every time he asked her to take it off inside. He'd stopped asking. Some battles you pick because they matter. Some you let go because the kid needs to feel like she wins sometimes, too. He pulled into the lot on Elgin just after the lunch crowd had thinned, which was the whole point. Maisie had a dental appointment at 2, which she'd been anxious about since Sunday, and Joel had learned early that the best way to help her through hard things was to put some small and good just before them. A cookie, a favorite song, a seat by the window. He wasn't a therapist. He was just her father, working with what he had. Inside, the cafe was warm the way old brick buildings hold warmth, like it had been saving it up since autumn. About a dozen tables, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu above the counter with something about a pumpkin scone that Maisie immediately noticed and pointed to with both hands as though it might escape. The woman behind the counter was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back simply, wearing a plain green apron and the particular kind of calm that people develop when they've done a job long enough to stop performing it. She smiled at Maisie first, which Joel noticed, and then looked at him with the same patience. "Pumpkin scone," Maisie said before Joel had even stopped moving. "I figured," the woman said. Her name tag said Nora. "They just came out of the oven about 40 minutes ago." Joel ordered a medium dark roast and Maisie's scone and found them a seat near the window because the light was better there, and because Maisie liked to watch people walk by on the sidewalk and narrate their lives, which she'd been doing since she could talk, and which Joel had never once found anything but quietly wonderful. He was 3 sips into his coffee when the door opened hard enough to push the little bell above it sideways. The man who came in was wearing a coat that probably cost more than Joel's truck payment. Dark charcoal, well-tailored, the kind of clothing that communicated money in the same way that a certain tone of voice communicated contempt, automatically without effort. He was maybe 50, with the look of someone who had not waited in a line in years, and had decided this was a moral virtue. He didn't look at the menu. He walked straight to the counter, pulled out his phone, and placed his order at the woman behind the counter before she had finished with the customer ahead of him. Joel watched Nora hold up one hand, politely, still speaking to the older gentleman she was helping. The man in the charcoal coat exhaled through his nose, a theatrical exhale, the kind that was meant to be heard. The older gentleman thanked Nora and moved off with his tea. Nora turned and offered the same calm expression she'd had all along. "Americano," the man said. "Double, and make it properly this time. Last one I got here was lukewarm." "I'll make sure it's hot," Nora said. "It should be hot by default. That's not a special request. That's competence." A couple at the nearest table glanced up. Joel wrapped both hands around his mug. Maisie was watching the window, still narrating something to herself about a man outside with a very large dog, unaware. Joel kept his attention forward. Nora turned to the espresso machine and began pulling the shot without responding to the comment. Joel had noticed she did that. Absorbed things without reacting, which took more discipline than most people understood. The man checked his phone, then looked up at her back. "I have a 2 o'clock at the Westin. Do you think you could move faster than a Tuesday morning?" "Almost ready," Nora said. Her voice was even. "Still, almost isn't a time." He set his phone face down on the counter with a sound that was louder than it needed to be. "What's your name?" "Nora, Nora." He said it the way people say a word when they're committing it to some kind of complaint ledger. "How long have you worked here?" "About 7 months. Do you think 7 months qualifies you to make an Americano?" Joel put his mug down. Maisie had stopped her narration. She'd gone quiet the way kids go quiet when they sense something without being able to name it. Body still, eyes not quite focused, ears doing all the work. Nora set the cup on the counter and slid it toward him. "Here you go." The man picked it up, and Joel could see from across the room that he was going to find something wrong with it before he even tasted it. It was in the posture, the deliberate way he lifted it, the slight lift of his chin. "This is still not hot enough. I can make you another one. I don't have time for another one. That's the entire point of what I just said." He set it back on the counter harder than necessary. "Some of it splashed. I don't understand why this is difficult." Joel stood up. He didn't plan it. He simply found himself standing the way he used to find himself moving toward things in his old job as a wildfire crew supervisor in Northern Ontario. Not a dramatic decision, just a body responding to a clear signal that something needed to happen. He crossed the cafe in 5 or 6 steps. The man in the charcoal coat turned, faintly annoyed at someone approaching him, which was the particular look of a person who had decided they existed outside the normal rules of public space. Joel stopped at the counter beside him. Not in front. Beside. She offered to make you another one, Joel said. His voice was quiet. Not aggressive, but not soft either. The way you talk when you mean what you're saying and don't need volume to prove it. The man blinked. He looked at Joel the way people look at something they weren't expecting to need to categorize. Work jacket, calloused hands, someone who drove a truck and got up before the sun. Then the blink became a thin smile. I'm sorry? She offered to fix it. You turned her down, then kept going anyway. Joel kept his hands at his sides. That's not about the coffee anymore. The man's smile didn't disappear. It rearranged itself into something sharper. Is she a friend of yours? No, then I'm not sure what gives you the impression this concerns you. Joel looked at him steadily. She's a person in the room. That's enough. A beat of silence. The cafe had gone very quiet, the way rooms go quiet when everyone has decided to watch without appearing to watch. The man set down his phone and adjusted the cuffs of his coat, a deliberate gesture, buying time while he recalibrated. Then he looked at Nora directly. I'd like to speak to the owner. The owner's isn't in right now, Nora said. Then I'd like the owner's contact information. I can leave a message for her to call you. Her, the man said it the way people say something they find mildly amusing and mildly contemptible in the same breath. Right. He picked up his cup again. You know, this whole cafe has a problem with standards. The kind of problem that ends leases. Nora did not move. Joel frowned. What does that mean? It means, the man said, turning toward him again, that some of us have relationships with the properties on this street that go back longer than 7 months. He put a slight, pointed emphasis on the number. And some of us make decisions about which businesses stay and which don't based on the kind of service we receive. He looked back at Nora. I'd remember that. He took his Americano and left. The bell above the door went sideways again on his way out. Nobody moved for a few seconds. Then the couple at the nearest table exhaled. Someone near the back went back to their laptop. Joel stayed at the counter. He looked at Nora, whose hands were flat on the wood now, head slightly bowed. Her expression hadn't broken. She still had the same controlled stillness, but something behind it had shifted. He'd seen that look before in crew members after a long second day on a fire line. Not quite defeat, more like the cost of composure finally becoming visible. You all right? He asked. She looked up. I'm sorry you had to see that. Don't apologize for him. She picked up a cloth and began wiping the counter where the coffee had splashed, the motion automatic, practiced. It's fine, he comes in sometimes. Joel felt something tighten in his chest. That happens more than once? Nora glanced toward the window and didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. He was about to say something else when Maisie appeared at his elbow, scone in one hand, eyes serious. That man was rude to you, she said to Nora, with the unfiltered directness of someone who had not yet learned to soften observations into questions. Nora looked at her. For the first time since the man had walked out, her expression softened genuinely. Yeah, he was. My dad gets mad when people are rude for no reason. Joel put a hand gently on Maisie's shoulder. We say that man had a bad day in public, remember? Maisie considered this. He didn't seem like he was having a bad day. He seemed like he was being mean on purpose. Joel caught Nora's eyes and she was close to laughing, which felt like a small relief after what had just happened. You're probably right, Nora said. Maisie seemed satisfied with this verdict. She went back to the window, taking her scone with her. Joel stayed another moment. If he threatens the cafe again, it's complicated, Nora said quietly. He didn't push. He returned to his seat. They stayed for another 20 minutes until Maisie finished her scone and grew anxious again about the dental appointment. And then he paid and tipped more than he usually did and said goodbye. He didn't think much about it on the drive to the dentist. He thought about Maisie's appointment, about the afternoon pickup from school for her friend Amara, about whether he had enough in the fridge for dinner. The cafe was already filing itself under things you can't fix that you still did right. He was wrong about the filing. By 9 that evening, after Maisie was in bed and Joel was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside him and a stack of equipment invoices he needed to sort through before morning, his phone lit up with a message from Marcus Webb, his equipment supplier for the past 4 years. Hey Joel, getting some pressure from Darlington Property Group not to renew your supply contract when it's up next month. Something about a dispute at one of their tenant locations? I'm sorry, man. I'm trying to hold it. Just wanted you to know. Joel read it twice. Then he set his phone down and stared at the wall for a moment. He typed back, I appreciate the heads up. Is the name Preston Darlington connected to this? 3 minutes later, that's the guy who called. Joel closed his eyes briefly. Preston Darlington. He'd placed the name on the drive home, rolling it through the back of his mind the way you do with something that doesn't quite land yet. Preston Darlington was the majority stakeholder in Darlington Property Group, which held commercial leases on most of the Elgin Street block, including, Joel now understood with a cold clarity, the building that housed Rito Perk. He'd known men like that in forestry before he'd gone independent, people who understood the ecosystems of influence better than the ecosystems they were supposedly managing, who knew that real power lived not in what you said publicly but in which calls you made quietly, and to whom and when. The second message came at 11:14, when he was almost asleep. Unknown number. You don't know me, but I know what happened today and I know what's coming. If you're willing to meet, I'll explain. Coffee, tomorrow, anywhere you choose. He stared at it for a long time. He thought about the cloth moving automatically over the counter, the controlled stillness. The look behind the eyes that was not fear but something more deliberate than fear. He typed back, Rito Perk at 8? The reply came in under a minute, see you then. He was there at 7:52, Maisie at school, thermos of his own coffee left sitting on the counter at home because it felt strange to bring coffee to a café. Nora was already there when he arrived, but she was not behind the counter. She was sitting at the table farthest from the window, in a dark jacket and reading glasses she hadn't been wearing the day before, with a tablet and a leather portfolio open in front of her. She looked entirely and completely like someone who worked in an office, not like someone who wiped coffee splashes off counters. The woman who opened the cafe that morning was someone else, younger, who didn't seem to know Joel or register anything unusual about a woman sitting in the corner with corporate paperwork at 8 a.m. Joel sat across from Nora. She took off the reading glasses and set them beside the portfolio. You don't actually work here, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I work here 2 mornings a week, she said. For the past 3 months. He waited. My name is Nora Calloway. She paused a beat, not for drama. He would understand later that she was simply precise about where to start. I'm the founder and managing director of Calloway Development Partners. We own 34 commercial properties in the Ottawa region, including 6 on this street. Joel held very still. The cafe, he said. The cafe, yes. She folded her hands on the table. Among others. He leaned back slowly. You were working the counter because 3 of my tenants filed complaints over the past 18 months about pressure from a competing property group. Lease interference, supplier intimidation, veiled threats about zoning reviews, all pointing toward Darlington. She looked at him steadily. Pattern recognition is easier from the inside. He understood then what he hadn't understood the day before, that the controlled stillness behind the counter wasn't just composure. It was concentration. She had been watching, listening, waiting for exactly what had happened to happen, and it had happened in front of a stranger who hadn't stayed seated when he probably should have, from a tactical perspective. So I got in the way of your operation, he said. You got in the way of him finishing what he came in here to do, she said, which was deliver a message to whoever was working the counter that Darlington could reach them anywhere. He didn't know it was me. He was talking to an employee of mine. She paused. You interrupted that. He still got his point across. He still got his point across, she agreed, to the wrong person. A short silence. And now he's pulling my supplier contracts, Joel said. Something shifted in her expression, not guilt exactly, but the particular weight of someone who has accounted for collateral damage and still doesn't like the count. Yes, Marcus Webb's company supplies 2 Darlington-managed restaurant kitchens. Preston made a call this morning, which is actually useful information because it's the second time we've documented him using supplier relationships as leverage against people who cross his path. Useful for you, Joel said. My supply contract comes up in 3 weeks, I know. He studied her. She didn't look away. This is what you needed, he said. The documentation. A third-party account of what happened from someone who had no reason to be involved. Your account, and the footage from the security camera above the counter, and Marcus's message confirming the call, and the timeline. Yes. She opened the portfolio. Together it's enough to take to the Commercial Tenancy Board and to the 2 city councilors. His group has been lobbying for reasoning approvals. So you're asking me for a statement. I'm telling you what happened because you deserve to know, she said. I'm not asking you for anything. I have enough without you. But I wanted you to understand what you walked into. He looked at the table for a moment. Outside, someone walked by with a golden retriever and a coffee, and the ordinary morning continued entirely unaware of what was sitting in the corner. The man threatened the cafe's lease, he said. He threatened whatever business relationships he could reach. He does this to people who can't push back. He looked up. And you've been in here for 3 months watching it, yes, and you have enough to stop him now. Enough to hold him accountable, which is different from stopping, she said. People like Preston don't stop, they recalculate. Joel thought about wildfire seasons, about the difference between a fire that was contained and a fire that was out. He'd spent 15 years learning that difference, mostly the hard way. What happens to my contract, he said. That depends on Marcus and on Preston's reach with him and on timing. She pulled a single sheet from the portfolio and slid it across to him. A letter already printed on Callaway Development Partners letterhead. That's a service agreement for maintenance and emergency equipment support across 4 of my properties on this street, including this building. 12-month guaranteed term. The rates are current market. He looked at the sheet. He didn't touch it. That's not a trade, she said. I'd have offered it regardless. Your company came up in the same supplier research I did on Darlington. You have 3 years of references from independent building owners in Centertown. I'd been meaning to reach out before this. He looked at her for a long moment, trying to find the transactional layer in it, the version where this was a repair job, compensation, managing a problem. He was fair at reading people, usually. She held his look without giving him anything to read except straight. He picked up the sheet. I want to give a statement, he said. You don't have to. I know. He set the sheet back on the table between them. I want to. She looked at him the way people look at something they had prepared to be more complicated. The hearing before the Ottawa Commercial Tenancy Board was 3 weeks later, on a Thursday, in a room on Spark Street that smelled like recycled air and institutional carpet. Joel wore the jacket from Maisie's school winter concert again. It was still the best thing he owned that didn't have a reflective stripe on it, and he sat in a row of seats behind a low wooden partition, while Nora Calloway stood at the front of the room with a lawyer named Gwen Abubakar and presented 47 pages of documented evidence to a board of 5. Preston Darlington arrived with 2 lawyers and a publicist. Joel noticed the publicist because you don't need one of those in a tenancy hearing unless you've already decided the real fight is in the court of perception. The evidence was methodical. Lease pressure letters. Supplier interference documented through email chains Nora's legal team had subpoenaed. Zoning lobbying traced back to 4 businesses that had complained and then quietly closed. A former Darlington property manager who had agreed to speak, voice altered about instructions she'd received. And then the security footage from Rideau Perk, clear audio. Preston at the counter. This whole cafe has a problem with standards. The kind that ends leases. And then Nora's voice, steady, I can leave a message for her to call you. And then Joel's, quiet and direct, that's not about the coffee anymore. Preston's lead lawyer objected 3 times. The board chair overruled all 3. When it was Joel's turn, he sat at the table in the middle of the room and answered questions from Gwen Abubakar for 18 minutes. He described what he had seen and heard. He described the call from Marcus Webb. He was not eloquent. He did not have practiced sentences. He said what happened in order as clearly as he could, and when Preston's lawyer tried to characterize it as a misunderstanding between a customer and a barista, Joel said, simply, that's not what I witnessed. He'd said things under pressure before that he wasn't proud of. He'd stayed quiet when he should have spoken and spoken when he should have waited. He didn't think this was going to be one of those. He just wasn't sure yet, sitting in that room, which kind of thing it was. After the session recessed, he stood in the hallway outside while people moved around him with briefcases and tablets, and Nora came and stood beside him. She'd been composed all morning. Now she just looked tired, which he thought was probably more honest. Thank you, she said. Did it help? Yes. He nodded. The hallway was loud enough that they didn't have to fill the silence. I asked Marcus to hold the contract review until after today, she said. He agreed. He'll confirm this afternoon. Joel breathed once, slowly. All right, the board will take 2 to 3 weeks to issue findings. Preston won't move on anything in that window. Too visible. She looked at him. You have a bit of breathing room. He thought about the bills on the kitchen table, still there in the same pile, because that was how it worked. The world keeps its accounting while yours is in suspension. A bit. A group of lawyers moved past them. In the window at the end of the hall, Ottawa was going about a Thursday in October without any particular interest in what was happening on the 4th floor of this building. You have a daughter, Nora said. Not a question. Maisie, he said it the way he always said it, like the name was weight-bearing. How old? 7. A pause. My father raised me on his own from when I was 9, she said. He was a site supervisor on construction projects. He used to wear the same jacket to every important meeting he ever had. He said the jacket didn't matter, the words did. Joel looked at his jacket sleeve, then at her. How'd that work out for him? He retired 4 years ago and lives in Kelowna and grows too many tomatoes. A faint smile. So, fairly well, I think. The board issued its preliminary findings 19 days later. Joel was at a service call in Hintonburg when his phone buzzed, an email from Gwen Abubakar forwarded by Nora with no message attached, only the subject line, "See attached." The findings recommended a formal review of Darlington Property Group's conduct under the Provincial Commercial Tenancy Act, a freeze on any lease acceleration actions against 6 named businesses pending investigation, and a referral to the city's Economic Development Office regarding the zoning lobbying. It was not a conviction, it was not an ending. Nora had been right about that part, recalibration, not stopping. But Preston Darlington's lawyer called Marcus Webb that same afternoon, and whatever was said, Marcus messaged Joel 2 hours later. "Contract's yours, man, same terms as before. Sorry for the delay." Joel sat in his truck for a while after that, in the parking lot of a grocery store, watching people push carts and carry bags and live ordinary lives with total commitment to their ordinariness. And he thought about what Maisie had said in the cafe. He seemed like he was being mean on purpose. 7 years old, and she'd named it exactly right, which was either a sign that people were more transparent than they thought, or a sign that his daughter was paying better attention than most adults. He thought about what something cost if you stayed seated. He thought about the jacket he kept wearing to important things without quite meaning to. He drove home through the early dark, autumn, coming in fast the way it did in Ottawa, no gradual descent, just one afternoon when the light changes and doesn't change back. He stopped at the grocery store and bought pasta and a bag of apples and a thing of maple syrup because Maisie had declared it was a pancake week, which was a category she had invented and which he had decided was worth honoring. On his way out, his phone buzzed. A message from Nora. "The cafe is doing a soft close this Saturday to thank the regular customers who've been there during the past few months. You're on the list if you'd like to bring Maisie. There will be pumpkin scones." He stood in the parking lot with grocery bags in both hands and read it twice. Then he thought about all the ways things could have gone differently. If he'd stayed in his seat, if Maisie had already finished her scone, if he'd chosen the other cafe on Bank Street instead. He thought about the odd, crooked geometry of moments that matter. He typed back, "She'll hold you to the scones." A minute later, "Good, that's exactly the kind of accountability I prefer." He put the phone in his pocket and carried the groceries to his truck and drove home through Ottawa in the dark. And the city looked the same as it always did, a little gray, a little beautiful, going about its business without ceremony or announcement. And in the morning he'd deal with the invoices and the equipment logs and the early call he'd booked for a restaurant in the market, and Maisie would eat breakfast too fast and forget to brush the back of her teeth, and he'd remind her 3 times, and she'd do it on the 3rd. And it would be an ordinary day, which was a kind of thing he'd learned not to take lightly. But that night he sat at the kitchen table after Maisie was asleep, and the house was quiet with that particular quality of quiet that belongs to people who live alone with someone small who makes a lot of noise. And he looked at the service agreement from Callaway Development Partners that was still sitting on the corner of the table, unsigned, where he'd left it 3 weeks ago. He picked up a pen. He signed it. He put it in the envelope he'd already addressed and left it by the door for the morning, and then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. And somewhere across the city, the cafe on Elgin Street sat quiet and warm, smelling of old brick and coffee, holding the shape of ordinary days the way good places do, steadily without asking to be noticed for it.